Nobody wants to think about preparing for divorce, nor do they really want to think about preparing for dying. So what a lot of people do is just put it on the back burner. And what we realized, and the reason we started our company, is when someone is thinking about divorce, the first thing they want to do is call an attorney. And so when someone dies, likewise, right? They think we're going to call an attorney and they're going to fix everything and they're going to have everything set out for me and I'll just move forward. Preparation is key in both cases. And I see that as a huge intersection because if you prepare for divorce, you can make more informed decisions. If you prepare for death, your family is then protected because you chose to prepare and you're not leaving them with how to figure everything out.
Welcome to the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. If you ever asked, how do I protect myself and those I love if something unexpected happened to me? You're in the right place. I'm your host, Niki Weiss, and together we'll explore how to protect yourself in a world where both your physical and digital legacy leave a lasting impact. And welcome back to another podcast of Death, Dying, the Digital Age, where we explore digital legacy. And I'm here with Catherine and Karen. I met you ladies, over 10 years ago, where we really started a women's group. I'm talking about empowering women. And now you have My Divorce Solution. And, people would think, how does death and dying intersect with divorce solution? And for me, I see the empowerment in having a plan. So can you share with us more about your product and services that you offer your clients?
Great. Yes. Thanks for having us. So My Divorce Solution is an online platform to get organized and prepared and financially clear when going through the divorce process. So we really work with anyone who is thinking divorce or who's in the process of going through it already. And we have a platform where we gather all your documentation, we work through your lifestyle analysis, and then we go through division scenarios with you so that you are clear and you make the best decisions based on data, not on emotions. Karen and I started our company 7 or 8 years ago. We're in every state. We're actually in a couple of different countries now. So it's been, since we last spoke, it's been a whirlwind of growth and empowerment. We are powered by knowledge, and that's what we do. We're helping people get through the process.
In the digital age as well. And then Karen, when I approached you and said, hey, I'm starting this podcast, I've started My Final Playbook, which is building out end-of-life planning in the digital age. And I said, you thought that was, you and I were talking, it's super interesting. Where do you see that intersection between death and divorce?
So the intersection there would be, again, in the space of preparation, right? Nobody wants to think about preparing for divorce, nor do they really want to think about preparing for dying. So what a lot of people do is just put it on the back burner. And what we realized, and the reason we started our company, is when someone is thinking about divorce, the first thing they want to do is call an attorney. And so when someone dies, likewise, right? They think we're going to call an attorney and they're going to fix everything and they're going to have everything set out for me and I'll just move forward. Preparation is key in both cases. And I see that as a huge intersection because if you prepare for divorce, you can make more informed decisions. If you prepare for death, your family is then protected because you chose to prepare and you're not leaving them with how to figure everything out. So, again, it's all in the space of preparation and being, I want to say, brave enough to take the first steps because, everybody thinks it's kind of like putting new windows in your home, right? You think you need them, but it's not, you're not going to call to get new windows until they're leaking. And really that's too late, right? Because you really don't have enough information and knowledge and education to make really good decisions for yourself and your family. So that's where I believe we completely intersect.
Losing a marriage, there's a death process there. to be able to go through that grieving process. But at the same time, just like going through a divorce, there's a level of shock and trauma that people are going through, and not necessarily the best decision-making opportunity, right? You don't want to be going to a funeral home when you have no idea what you're going to be looking for, and then actually writing a very large check. So to be able to be more proactive, empowered, to be knowledgeable about what's involved, the administrative process, to be able to do some pre-planning, especially if you're thinking about divorce. So in thinking about divorce and some of the documentation that is associated with end-of-life planning, where do you advise your clients?
Where do we advise them to start?
Yeah, what are some of the documentation that you would be looking at when it comes to advising your clients in thinking about end-of-life planning?
Well, I was going to say just your basic information. And again, I say that from a space of making sure you have things in line so that your family can, take the ball and roll with it. So, having your account statements, anything that's pertinent to your financial well-being needs to all be in one place. So I'm sure you have some kind of process for that for your clients, or, we have what we call a forever box that, they can start accumulating stuff. It's coded, things like that. But also understanding the estate planning process itself, right? Making sure your will is up to date, your medical power of attorney is up to date, and all of those documents in place, and not waiting till the last minute, because there is a lot of thought and preparation that goes into it that everyone needs to consider for sure.
I would think that timing is critical when someone's going through divorce. It's like, at what point should they start making those changes or thinking about them, right? And I would think that those would be two different milestones. I'm thinking about a divorce and I should make the changes, or I'm divorcing and those changes should already be made. So what could that timeline possibly be?
Well, I want to back up a little bit, because collecting documents in our process for divorce is different than collecting documents for end-of-life planning. So although Karen mentioned a lot of great things that we put in there for consideration for divorce planning, we go back 3 to 5 years sometimes with documentation. So the nice thing about going through our process is we have it all inventoried, it's all digitally saved and all of that. So you will have all that information to do that planning. But I want to say now, don't run out if you're thinking divorce and start changing your beneficiary or start changing things, because guess what? Your spouse is going to do the same thing and you're going to be pissed off. So just hold off. Our thing is all about we have a 10-step process. You follow this process. And if you go through this process, your mind shift is going to change. And so then you're going to be able to take your portrait. We have a MDS financial portrait, and take it to you, Niki. And that's where they can use your app and do their, end of life planning. So you're already going to see your confidence change just by going through our process and having everything that you need, because you will have everything you need. It's your entire marital estate.
So true. And I just want to add there, every state is different relative to a spouse's entitlement to the marital estate if they're not divorced, but someone passes away first. There's a lot of law applied to that, and every state is different. So if your friend's attorney said, well, we filed for divorce, but if my spouse dies, I still get everything, that may or may not be true for you. So those are questions that you need to ask your attorney as you're going through the process to determine when you should make those beneficiary changes. And one of the things that we do when attorneys are involved is we ask very pertinent questions on that in that space. So again, to your point, Niki, timing is everything. But we like to, for those type of permanent decisions, we do like to wait as long as possible if it's to the benefit of our clients.
The timing to me is probably key, right? Because you don't want to aggravate or instigate if there's someone coming to you thinking about divorce, but maybe not ready to pull the trigger, that they're just gathering those informations. But if they start changing their documentation, their beneficiaries, and their spouse finds out about it, that could make it explosive unnecessarily. Have you had any stories or experiences that you could share?
Well, there's a couple of things. One is someone does change the beneficiary and they sign their spouse's name, because on retirement plans, you need your spouse's signature to change a beneficiary. That has occurred. And there's also stories where beneficiaries not changed and you remarry a second spouse who left his first wife as the beneficiary. And guess who gets that? Who's the benefactor? It's the ex-spouse.
I had that to me. I've heard that a lot where they just forgot about an insurance policy, that they bought 20 years ago. And then here they have a divorce and the person dies.
Let me say, I wouldn't mind if my first spouse did that. So I totally get it, But the worst story I have ever heard, and it's not about beneficiaries, it's about completing your qualified domestic relations order, which is the process of which your pension or any ERISA run plan is divided. So it could be in your agreement that you have to process the quadro, but the employee spouse has to initiate that and follow through. And there was a case where a gentleman went to retire and he couldn't. And he had been divorced for 20 years. And he couldn't because they never processed the quadro. Now, they came to us to do an actuary calculation, which we couldn't do. So we had to refer it out. But not many people wanted to take that case because you can make a huge mistake there. So one of our considerations is to make sure that quadro, if at all possible, to get it signed during the process while everybody's in the signing mode, rather than having to come back and do it later.
Well, could we just take a step back? Because that's a new term I've never heard before, quadro. So what was the acronym is quadro, and what does it stand for?
It's a QDRO, which is how everybody knows it. That's how it's usually written up in your agreement. But it's a qualified domestic relations order. And any ERISA run retirement plan has to be transferred that way. It's just the legal paperwork that has to be done.
So for people that are listening and they're not familiar with that term, that's do your own research, right? There's an opportunity to go ahead and explore that. Karen, did you have any thoughts on what Catherine just shared?
No, other than that's really important. And we run across it a lot with people, years after their divorce saying, I don't think that this ever got done. And going back and trying to get it done is painful and expensive. It's really hard to go back and kind of recreate history over those certain years. And also people need to understand that quadros, to Catherine's point, are for the ERISA governed plans. They're different accounts than IRAs. So that's just, people should just know that as well. A lot of attorneys don't know that.
If you even have this question coming up, you should be going through our process because you don't need a quadro unless you're going through a divorce. So it is a consideration with us. But in light of this conversation today with you, Niki, there is a section in a quadro, and if you don't fill that out properly, it is a section about what happens if one of the spouse passes away in the time period that it takes to process the quadro. What happens to those monies? So it's a very important section that a lot of people just bypass, or they don't even read it because you're exhausted at that point and you're just so happy that your divorce is final. So you just sign off on this. But if your spouse passes away, or you pass away and you were the receiver of that, your half of that pension or that 401k plan, that's probably one you're most familiar with, or a 403b. If you think your children are going to get that and that wasn't completed properly, your ex-spouse is probably going to get to keep the whole thing.
Oh my goodness. That's huge. I mean, this is why I knew having this conversation with you ladies would be very beneficial to people that realize that, yeah, you're closing out your marriage, but there's so much documentation that is relevant to end of life planning as well that might not be addressed unless they use a service like yours, right? So there are a lot of people out there that will just go and do the, DIY divorces, but have they really looked at all the relevant documentation that's been built out throughout the entire marriage? And to be able to consider that as well.
And what people should know, if you've even entered into a prenup or a postnup agreement, those aren't necessarily filed with the court. And so if you have one, you need to make sure somebody knows about it, especially if it pertains to what you would retain. Because if someone dies and that's not on the table, it could just be completely disregarded in your further estate planning.
I look at end of life planning should begin before you get married. Like that should be like a conversation people should have, just like a prenup, right? Within prenups, would you say there is language in there, as you're stating, what kind of language would be included in the prenup regarding end of life or in case of death that people should be more aware of?
I think it's probably not so much I've never really seen it in a prenup personally. The most important thing was when you're doing a prenup is to make sure any accounts that are separate property that you are naming your beneficiaries. All your retirement plans come with free beneficiary naming. You just got to you just have to do it. You have to name your beneficiary. And your non-retirement accounts, there are TOD accounts, which means transfer on death. So if you have a premarital asset, I would make sure the registration is such who you want to receive your money would get it.
Now, have you dealt with any of like digital assets when it comes to transferring them within, within the marriage and moving out of the divorce aspect?
Good luck with that. Yes.
Well, the legal field has not really caught up. You're talking about cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, things like that, right? Not to even mention Venmo, PayPal, Zelle accounts. So those kind of all get lost in the discovery process because, like I said, litigation and the legal cases have not caught up to, how to deal with the division of these assets. So they're very difficult because they're essentially nefarious, right? They're hard to lock down. They're hard to find. The wallets are hard to find. Where are they? Have they been redistributed? So those are very difficult assets that we work with on a daily basis. Just helping to frame out how to value them and how to divide them. And then to your point, Catherine, even with the retirement accounts, after you get the divorce decree, then making sure that those are divided properly. And it's not easy for sure.
A lot of people want to jump in and just negotiate that away because it's just a complicated asset. And either one spouse says, I wanted nothing to do with that. He did that without me knowing, or she didn't want to be a part of that, or she did it without me knowing. I think probably not the best, but one very important aspect is to negotiate that towards the end, because the person who is involved with crypto wants it. They're attached to that investment. But the change in value is drastic on a daily basis, typically. So you want to make sure that you have an attorney who's confident, or a mediator who's confident enough to say, listen, pull up that account right now so we can see the value today. They might not print something out for you, but if they have it, they can pull it up and see what it's worth. And so even if you go by that and you do that at certain times within your process, so you can track the value of that. And if you don't want it, then you just know approximately how much to negotiate. Because somebody would say, today I could tell you, yeah, I have 2,000. Tomorrow it could be 200,000. You don't know what I'm adding to it or what I'm doing with it. So you really want live accounting for it as you go throughout the process.
Well, let me ask you both have been in this industry quite some time. How have you seen in just recent years the digital impact in divorcing and that digital footprint, right? So working with, is there such thing that you've worked with? Like, I know there's private investigators, right? That are hired when the divorce is happening just to get proof of whatever activities someone is doing. Do you find that you're starting because of the digital complexity and inequity, right? So you might have a spouse that might be less tech savvy or tech timid, and then you might have the other spouse that might be a developer or a solutions architect and be able to nefariously or strategically navigate through their digital assets. How could someone possibly, what do you do as Divorce Solution to be able to support your clients in that scenario?
Well, first I want to bring up something because Karen, I don't know what you're going to say, but do you remember that when we first started, Karen, the biggest digital asset problem was spouses who were taking the other spouse's laptop. And so everybody was we saw them go through the lawyers and argue this because of and it wasn't so much the data, it was the personal things on the laptop that they were so concerned about. Or it was their first venture into the digital world by just having a laptop. And now their spouse is taking it from them. So that's all their security because everything's on that laptop. So it's so funny when you're saying digital, my brain is going back to a couple of clients probably 10 years ago that were just fighting to get their laptop back, right? If that was the only problem we had now, it would be much easier with the digital assets that are now troublesome.
In the cloud. It's all cloud-based, right? It's not on a device anymore. It really is in the cloud, and then that multi-factor authentication and moving assets around.
And safe deposit boxes in various places. Yeah, it's a thing. We see it often. But what I want to say is because it's newer relative to litigation, right? We often see attorneys just disregarding it. So sometimes I'll be on a call and we'll be talking about the cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, whatever it is. And they'll say, oh, they'll just split that. Okay, well, what is the value of it and how do you split it? We'll worry about that later. And then when we're talking about the value of it, well, where did you get that value? Well, that's what the spouse said it was. And then you also have a further problem of it is a major vehicle now of what we call dissipation of assets. The main earning spouse will use the cryptocurrency as a way to divert marital assets away because they know that it's an easy place to hide money or hide currency. So we're seeing so much of it. And, it's our job to stay in the ring and make sure that, it's paid attention to for sure.
Is there such thing in your industry now that private investigators are specializing in this digital forensics?
They're really hard to find. I think you're talking about valuators.
For cybersecurity specialists,
to get them involved in a family law case would almost be cost prohibitive just because it's so new to the industry.
And people will default to hiring a forensic accountant, right? Forensic accountants are great if you know what the scope of their job is. So unfortunately, in divorce, we see so many forensic accountants being hired to do glorified bookkeeping, basically. So if you're hiring a forensic accountant to do that, you want to make sure you know what the deliverable is and what they're actually doing. And they're probably not going into crypto accounts unless they see transactions coming out, right? So that's different. But where is it? So I would just be weary of what you're actually hiring somebody to do and what's the rabbit hole you're going down to. So if you have an estate that's worth $100,000, are you really going to spend, how much could that person have invested in crypto, basically? Are you going to spend 50 to 100 grand trying to find something that you think your spouse did? If you have an estate that's worth 5 million and maybe we think there's $1 million in there, or there's something that's circling around in their accounts that looks fishy, yeah, you're probably going to spend some time and money going down that rabbit hole because it could be worth millions. So you got to ask the right questions. When you come through our process, we ask all those, we notate what needs to be followed up with, and we have that conversation with you. Like this could be, or your attorney, this could be the road you're going down, and this could be the negative impact, and this could be the positive impact. And then for us, it's all about not making emotional decisions. It's about making financially strong decisions based on the data that you have or the data that you don't have. And that's basically what my divorce solution is set up to do. But I do want to bring up one more thing, Karen. We have a lot of this, especially since COVID. There's a lot of creative people out there. They're writing memoirs, they're writing fictional stories, they're journaling. People going through divorce, they want to journal what's happened. And, that's IP. So, if you have IP, you want to make sure that that's going also, any royalties might be going to the right person if it ever happens, right? So there is an if.
IP, so that legacy IP is going to be huge, right? So that's like a whole nother conversation to be able to say, I am building out, whether it's a book or an online business. I mean, the online businesses are big right now. And yet, if you're going through a divorce or at some point you forget that I started this online business while we were still married, and then you move out of the marriage into a divorce status, is that business still part of the assets, the marital assets that are divisible?
In the beginning, in this phase of going through the process, I'll think of a story, because you like stories, of a family that's still in the process. And through our conversation and us gathering the information, we don't just collect your documents. That's not what we do. We collect the appropriate documents. And then based on the conversation in your state, we collect more documents, or we collect more data even. Sometimes it's not even a document, but it's enough data. So this was a woman who said that she had a business, but it was really her hobby. And we also invite spouses to participate if they would like to. So they're having the conversation. Actually, this happened to two families. Karen, I know you probably know who I'm thinking about. And they're saying, oh yeah, we just set that up because I wrote a book, and just in case, we had to put it somewhere. But her and spouse said, yeah, it's not really worth anything. And then the woman was our client for the one case. And I said, okay, well, what book did you write? She goes, well, I actually wrote 6. I said, oh, and she goes, and you know what, after my divorce, and spouse agreed, she can have those. She wrote those as she was raising the kids and blah, blah, blah. So their agreement is wife is keeping it all. But I said, oh, she goes, I think I have an EIN number for one of them too. And I said, okay, so we collect all of that. And then she said, and I think I want to write a screenplay for some of them. That could be worth a ton of money. It could be worth nothing. But because the parties both agreed that she wrote it, there's no value to it now. It's not bringing in money. Husband wanted nothing to do with it. He thinks it's her little hobby, but she got a little excited after that. For us, it's about seeing their positioning change with their self-confidence or what they're going to do with the rest of their life. And she got a little spark, maybe I am going to make a screenplay about them. Yes, I definitely need that in my agreement. So we got all the names of the books. We got all the documentation. So she's set. It's inventoried for her to do her end of life planning or her just live out the rest of her life the best that she wants to
make sure that she's able to benefit from the assets that she's developed, right? Even though you might have been during the marriage.
And you know what? Catherine, if you had not done that, those would be undisclosed assets, right? And so when you get to a marital settlement agreement, if they're not disclosed, a lot of people will say, oh, we don't care, we don't care, we don't care. And so they don't even disclose. But if you don't disclose it, and she would have written a screenplay and it would have become worth, let's just say $1 million, $2 million, whatever it is, and she passes away, her spouse could have a claim. And so what we all know, I'm sure, I used to work for a estate planning law firm. The moment someone passes is the moment they show up at the door calling the attorneys, what's mine? What am I entitled to? And so however they feel when you're alive, once you've passed, the emotions kind of change because it changes to what's left for me. And because you're not there, it gets a little bit more aggressive, and that's sad. So, those things are really important to know, and you don't know what you don't know. And I always say you're not an expert at divorce and even dying until it happens. You don't want to find yourself in that space.
I think what's similar is that just like divorce and end of life planning is some people don't take action until they've seen someone else go through the mayhem. And I think that, where do you feel that people's blockers are in order to build out this plan, whether it's for a divorce or for end of life? Where do you feel like that sticky spot is for most people?
A fear of the unknown. There's just so many unknowns, and it boils down to the security of their life moving forward. So that's why we really hone in on getting the knowledge that you need. And so for us, we're not going to tell you what to do, but we're going to give you enough information and enough guidance to pull you forward, but we're going to walk alongside with you so that you make really smart decisions for yourself. And you know what? You can't blame anyone else but yourself if you're making a knowledge-based decision. So it's easier to heal from divorce when you know that everything is out there in black and white. And whether you choose to give something up because it's better for you emotionally moving forward, that's your decision. Nobody bullied you into it. Nobody preyed on you when you were really emotional. So for us, we love to see our clients just kind of change and make their own decision. Whether we agree with it or not doesn't matter. Whether your attorney agrees with it or not doesn't matter, because everybody goes home after that. And you're stuck to live your life. So make smart decisions for yourself based on data.
We talk about, we kind of started this conversation as like, divorce is very contentious and like the I don't want to say negative, but it's like more of the offensive. And I have to say, having been through a divorce myself, my ex-husband and I love him like a brother. I feel like he's part of my family. So if we can maybe shift it a little bit and maybe give some people, Karen, you mentioned creative divorces, right? So some people are divorcing just because, not that they don't love the person, it's just that they're not good partners together. So are there some ways or some scenarios that you have with some of your clients where, yes, they're breaking the contract of marriage, but they still want to be some level of partnership? Do you feel or have seen where maybe they don't take their name off of every policy or insurance. Like, what potential opportunity can divorcing couples still create an amicable and supportive relationship post marriage, even if at an end of life, from a documentation standpoint?
Well, we always say at My Divorce Solution, the solution isn't always divorce. So when clients enter our preparation platform, there's really no mandate that you've decided to get divorced. What you're deciding to do is get financially clear. And so in that space, you can decide what any future relationship with your spouse can be. And so just through the conversations, just through the exercise of financial clarity, sometimes people stay together. Sometimes, to your point, they get a postnup. And then if they get a postnup, then we always include, and if we decide to divorce, this will remain our separate property, right? So we go through to that, but we allow them the space. So, you with your ex, had you had this platform, you could have you could have changed your contract, right? Your marriage contract to, now we're not going to live together anymore. We're going to get divorced, and this is how it's going to be. And if you wanted your name on certain documents, if you wanted to retain a home, a business, an account, or whatever it would be documented. It would be a transaction that you would both feel good about. And then that would define your relationship moving forward. So I don't know any other arena or any other platform that allows for that type of change of contract.
Do you have any clients where the spouse that they're divorcing due to the spouse's either memory care, Alzheimer's, some sort of disease, that they just feel they can't for whatever reason, and you can talk more about that? Is that a scenario that you've been faced with before?
I don't mean to laugh, but I am, because we have a lot of our older women who, I'm saying 70 years old or older. People say, oh my gosh, you have someone that's 70 years old or 80 years old that's coming together. Why would they do that? They've been married 40, 50 years. That's typically because one spouse was not nice to the other spouse, but they never believed in divorce during their whole divorce. They just wanted to wait, and then they had grandkids and what have you. And they get to the point where they're like, I'm not taking care of him. He was so mean to me during our marriage. Why do I have to take care of him? It's not that they have Alzheimer's yet or that anything has set in. It's that they want to live their lives now. They want to be free, and the spouse wants to sit home and be miserable and not do anything. And they're like, I'm not doing that. And then I'm going to have to take him to his doctor's appointments. And then I'm just going to have to sit there with him all day. And so they want to, and I'm sure it can happen the other way too, but it's mostly with women who are afraid of having to take care of their spouse at this point. But I don't know, Karen, if you have any other input there, but that's what I'm just remembering. Several older women who have come and said, I just want out.
Yeah. And when you want out and someone is headed towards a long-term care facility, or they need that kind of care, if you don't have long-term care policies, you could be faced with Medicaid at some point. So then you have to have the discussion about, you don't want to be targeted for divorce planning, protect the Medicaid, right? So all of that comes into play, and it is a big deal. It is real. But if you do the preparation and the planning and have the conversations, you can make better decisions for yourself. And, because Catherine, people in that space who don't want to take care of someone for a variety of reasons or no reason at all, I typically see a pretty healthy amount of guilt rides along with that. And it makes it more difficult for them to make decisions for their betterment because they don't know how to, I guess, cut the connection there just because of their long-term marriage. So there are ways to navigate through that, but it all starts with being clear about, the impact of your decisions. It's really important.
And Catherine, I say that to my husband all the time when, he is my current husband who, chooses to eat certain food or, prefers to be horizontal than up and moving. And I do look at him and I'm like, there's going to come a time where I am just not going to want to wipe your ass. Happy to be with you now. And, for better or for worse, I know that there's that, that's been put into our brains, but at the same time, there's also lifestyle choices. And when we, have lived a wonderful life with somebody for 30, 40, 50 years, but then we reach to that point where because of their lifestyle choices or behavior back to us, do we really want to be living those end of life years, right? That last stage of our lives, 70, 80, 90 years old with someone who hasn't given us anything, and how to make that transition. That's huge, especially, and Karen, I'm jumping around. Karen, you mentioned, Medicare, they do a 5-year look back. So have you had, let's just take that right there. Has that?
Before you hop over to that, I'm going to hop back to what you just said. For better or worse doesn't mean for somebody that's purposely making it worse, right? So if your spouse is purposely making his life worse and your life worse, that's not what you signed up for. So yeah, you need to do good planning for yourself, and you could still stay married, but maybe you need a post-nup just so you have your own financial freedom. And maybe you need to do your end of life planning just so your half of whatever is going where you wanted it to go.
Based on that quality of life, right? I think for people that are moving into that, we have our go-go years, right? And then we have our not so go-go years. And what can those look like? Especially if there is an age differentiator, within the couple, or a health differentiator, one's healthier than the other, to be able to support them, but at the same time, as long as there's a level of respect and planning for, and I have also seen situations where I have one client who they were divorced, and then the husband became terminally ill, like less than 6 months, and the wife stepped up and actually became his primary caregiver. And then they actually kind of navigated some of those financial arrangements that she actually benefited at the end of his life. Have you seen a scenario like that?
It's not uncommon at all, but it all goes to how you've set up the relationship and the steps you've taken to both have that financial autonomy, right? So someone who would step up just means that they realize what they're stepping up into, right? They're not doing it out of fear, maybe some level of obligation, but typically those people have taken the steps for themselves. They know what it means to them, and they know what it means to their spouse and their well-being as well.
Well, I think it also has to do with how they go through the process. So if they go through the process being communicative and really having each other in mind when they negotiate, then yeah, you're going to have a better feeling about that person moving on. And so if something happens, then yeah, maybe I'll go and help because of the way we handled the process. But if you take me through the litigation route and you just try to be deceptive and all of that, the chances of me coming over to help later, why would I do that? So we really believe being prepared matters, and having a judgment-free platform like we have is your best hope of maybe living a life out like that, because isn't that wonderful? Because it's wonderful for your kids if you two can help each other moving on.
And just to close out this conversation, my divorce solution, it sounds like you really meet your clients where they're at, because there's different flavors of divorce, right? You can have that good divorce versus the aggressive offensive. So any words of wisdom or lessons learned that you can share with our audience as far as best preparing for divorce and end of life planning?
I would just say you're worth it. You're worth every second of it. Whether you believe you are or not, you should invest in yourself, and you should make sure that you have all the knowledge that you need to make really good decisions for yourself and your family, no matter what your family looks like afterwards. If you are not confident, no one else will be confident.
I love that. My last thoughts are really get comfortable with, first of all, talking about it. So you have to talk to yourself about it first, right? You have to at least accept that I'm going to die, and accept that you need to be informed, so you may not have to go through a divorce, but if you do go through a divorce, you're ready, meaning you have that financial autonomy. And so many people approaching divorce or approaching death, if they get sick or whatever, it feels overwhelming, but you can certainly make the choice now to unpack. And I always say, take one step at a time. You can choose to make one call. You can choose to get one document. You can choose to have one conversation and then move on from there. And that's all you have to do in the moment.
Well, thank you, Catherine and Karen. Appreciate all your time and expertise guiding people through this very difficult conversation, but meaningful as well. So thanks for joining.
Thanks for having us, Niki.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. I hope this conversation inspired you to take control and plan for the inevitable to protect yourself and those you leave behind. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter at digitallegacypodcast.com. Remember, life is full of surprises. What happens after you die shouldn't be. So keep your passwords safe and your playbook up to date.